Okay, let's have a little rant about Brexit, because that sure turned into a shit show quickly. Now, the reason it turned into a shit show so quickly can probably be summed up in the informational expansion. There was a simple vote, yes or no, in or out, that was then transformed into a proto-deal. Just a proto-deal, by the way. This isn't the actual deal. It's just the, preliminary, the taster, which was 500 pages long. None of that information was actually in the referendum. Now, if you think this is a very arse-backwards way of doing things, you're entirely correct. No sane person would ask people to commit to something with having no idea of what it would actually look like in reality. Sensible people would have probably drafted the 500-page document first and then had a referendum on whether people wanted to accept it or not, at which point you would have probably got a fairly clear answer like the one that Parliament gave. Now, you might think that this 500-page document can't have been that bad because there were years of negotiation by some devoted Brexiteers in there. No, the largest defeat in parliamentary history. Indeed, the Tories actually tried a vote of no confidence in their leader over this, right at about the point when this was all coming to a head. And there are so many beautiful ironies here, especially with the like of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who first of all supported May, then tried this vote of no confidence to get her out, saying that her deal was worse than remaining. It was the worst possible deal, only then to go and vote for it when things looked like they were getting desperate in Parliament, and even at that, they lost anyway. Yeah, this is clown car politics. May put her deal to Parliament 3 times, each time being defeated by significant margins. Yeah, apparently sometimes you can keep voting on things until you get the right result and call it democracy. And politicians apparently can change their mind from week to week depending on whether they think the Prime Minister is so bad that she needs a vote of no confidence or whether you want to support her deal. But apparently the British people are not allowed to do this because many politicians once said that this would be a once-in-a-lifetime vote. Well, politicians, it turns out, say a lot of things. Like this would have been the easiest trade deal in history. That there would be no extensions, that we would hold all of the cards, that we could have our cake and eat it, that you could breathe underwater for half an hour with this thing, that Brexit means Brexit, that the NHS was going to get £350 billion a day, and best of all, that we were going to take back control. Yeah, Brexit has been a very British farce. Taking back control took on a whole new meaning recently when the UK, having utterly failed to actually achieve anything, had its leader, Theresa May, sent out of the room while the EU debated whether they were going to give the UK an extension or not. Now, I was in part actually expecting and hoping that France would veto this extension. The expectation is that France, going back in time, twice vetoed the UK joining the EU in the first place. You know, the French and the English rarely miss a chance to put the boot in if the opportunity arises, leading to fun little expressions among people like the French and the Scottish, I should mention, that I support 2 teams, France and whoever is playing England, or Scotland and whoever is playing England. France has form for that sort of thing. Now, in the end, they didn't do it, but why was I kind of hoping that they would? All the arguments have been made. People aren't really going to change their minds at this point, and the only thing really left to do is to give people what they want. And, of course, it would be a mighty shit show for the UK that would drag on for at least a decade. Most notably with the 50 or so % of the food that the UK imports, which would be disrupted to a greater or lesser degree. I mean, certainly with things like fresh food. There'd be things like vegetable shortages and medicine shortages in the pharmacies. Brexit would just take a very sharp left turn into Realityville. And who, pray tell, would be left to sort all of this out? Why, the exact same clown car politicians that drove the UK into the ditch in the first place. Now, sure, this would hurt the EU too, just not proportionally as much. For a ballpark estimate, the UK and the EU trade roughly parity amounts of material. But the EU is much bigger than the UK, about 5 times bigger. Practical upshot is it would be worth about 10% of our economy and 2% of theirs. Disrupting the trade would have a much bigger effect on the UK than the EU. So why was I in part hoping for this train wreck? Well, firstly, it would put an end to Brexit, and obnoxious Brexiteers could sleep happily in the bed they'd made. Although I'm pretty sure that the disaster would be spun as, yes, this is the EU trying to punish the UK. Although I'm not quite so sure how that would actually bite. You know, there were 2 years trying to negotiate this deal in the first place, and in the end, it was the UK alone that couldn't agree on it. Sure, loads of people would have lost their jobs both in the UK and the EU, and all sorts of things would have come off the rails, but at least it would have been over. The UK could finally take back control by cutting and pasting all of those EU laws they were complaining about into British law. That was the plan. That was taking back control, copy and paste of EU laws. Because that really justifies spending billions of pounds and crippling the British political system. Now, there are lots of problems in the EU, which I could go on at some length, but the bottom line is, when you weigh the costs and the benefits, Brexit is not a smart move. But what has all this delivered? The political landscape post-Brexit is not the sunny uplands that was promised in the referendum, but a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Now, bear in mind that the Tories only just scraped in with a coalition government last time. Now, even UKIP have split because apparently the UKIP had attracted so many obnoxious right-wingers that it was too toxic for Nigel Farage, so he started a new party, the Brexit Party, all of which is threatening to split the Conservative Party, which already has just had a vote of no confidence in its leader. The irony being here is that loads of Brexiteers were going on with their own sort of reverse psychology, Project Fear type thing that you should give us Brexit because if you don't, it'll cause all the politics to shift to the far right. And we don't want the far right, so that's why you should give us what we want. You know, some brilliant reverse psychology there. In reality, it's been far more fractious for the right-wing side of politics, and it looks like, if anything, it's going to get a Labour government elected by splitting the Conservative Party. And I'm really not so sure that's going to make things better. So at the end of this, what did we end up with? A 6-month extension that can achieve nothing. The options on the table really haven't changed. There's a deal which, whether it's slightly modified or not, is essentially staying in the EU but not really getting a say about how the EU is run. No deal would still be a disaster that after about a decade would result in a negotiated trade deal which functionally serves almost exactly what the EU does at the moment. And that's assuming that we get competent technocrats in who know what they're doing, rather than sticking with the clown car politicians. Or we could have a second referendum, which means staying in, but it also means we have to put up with the whining of hardcore Brexiteers for the next 20 years. Yeah, Brexit is turning into a very British farce.